All right, so plastic recycling. Early in the S4A live streams, we're now at number 111. We were talking a lot about microplastics in the environment and things like that. So here's an article from The Guardian where I actually think is doing decent coverage of things like this. Obviously not from a Marxist lens, but just reporting some of the basic facts. Pretty good as far as environmental stuff. Headline, quote, "They lied. Plastics producers deceived the public about recycling," report reveals. Companies knew for decades that recycling was not viable, but they promoted it regardless, the Center for Climate Integrity study finds. Plastic producers have known for more than 30 years that recycling is not an economically or technically feasible plastic waste management solution. That has not stopped them from promoting it, according to a new report. And so, I mean, they've been going on about plastics recycling for more than 30 years, just like it says. I remember, this throughout most of my life. And so you've even seen it in stores, some places recently where a lot of the plastic bags and things, they no longer have the recycling logo. And I've seen some stores that actually have like in-house pseudo recycling programs. I mean, who knows what even happens with this plastic waste. But I've been seeing this increasingly over the last decade, reports where it's like only 5% of the plastic that gets put in the recycling bins actually gets recycled. And I've seen other things where like journalists followed a recycling truck and like at the end of picking everything up, it just like dumped it in a landfill. So people think that they're recycling and then it's just actually going in a landfill anyway. But keep this kind of thing in mind when the libertarians and other right-wingers come out and they say that, oh, climate change isn't a problem, we can just technology our way out of it. Well, how's that going so far? Not well at all. And even some of the things like, reducing plastic waste, which, remember, plastic is a fossil fuel byproduct. This is a lie. So let's continue. Quote, "The companies lied," said Richard Wiles, president of fossil fuel accountability advocacy group, the Center for Climate Integrity, CCI, which published the report. "It's time to hold them accountable for the damage they've caused. Plastic, which is made from oil and gas, is notoriously difficult to recycle. Doing so requires meticulous sorting, since most of the thousands of chemically distinct varieties of plastic cannot be recycled together. That renders an already pricey process even more expensive. Another challenge, the material degrades each time it's reused, meaning that it generally can only be reused once or twice. The industry is known for decades about these existential challenges, but obscured that information in its marketing campaigns," the report shows. Wait, are you telling me that marketing lied? I thought we were... anyway. The research draws on previous investigations as well as newly revealed internal documents illustrating the extent of this decades-long campaign. Industry insiders over the past several decades have variously referred to plastics recycling as uneconomical. They said that it, quote, "cannot be considered a permanent solid waste solution," and said that it, quote, "cannot go on indefinitely," these revelations show. The authors say that the evidence demonstrates that oil and petrochemical companies, as well as their trade associations, may have broken laws designed to protect the public from misleading marketing and pollution. So, single-use plastics. In the 1950s, plastic producers came up with an idea to ensure a continually growing market for their products, disposability. Quote, "They knew if they focused on single-use plastics, people would buy and buy and buy," said Davis Allen, investigative researcher at the CCI and the report's lead author. At a 1956 industry conference, the Society of the Plastics Industry, a trade group, told producers to focus on low cost, big volume, and expendability, and to aim for materials to end up, quote, "in the garbage wagon." The Society of Plastics is now known as the Plastics Industry Association. Quote, "As is typical, instead of working together toward actual solutions to address plastic waste, groups like CCI choose to level political attacks instead of constructive solutions," unquote, said Matt Seaholm, president and CEO of the trade group, in an emailed response to the report. So that's what the plastics people have to say when they're called out over this thing. And so they say, instead of working together, what do you mean working together? They're not working with you to make more plastic. Like, they don't want more junk. So these people, I swear, they think it revolves all around them. Over the following decades, the industry told the public that plastics can be easily tossed into landfills or burned in garbage incinerators. But in the 1980s, as municipalities began considering bans on grocery bags and other plastic products, the industry combated that idea of banning it by promoting recycling, a new solution. So now we get recycling campaigns in the 80s. The industry has long known that plastics recycling is not economically or practically viable, the report shows. This is just like climate change in general. ExxonMobil did studies on that, and they knew back in like the 70s that climate change was a risk due to the emissions from fossil fuel burning. So same thing here. They promote solutions that don't work, and they know it when they're doing it. An internal 1986 report from the trade association, the Vinyl Institute, noted that, quote, recycling cannot be considered a permanent solid waste solution to plastics as it merely prolongs the time until an item is disposed of, unquote. In 1980, but in other words, it will be disposed of eventually, just dragging that out a bit. In 1989, the founding director of the Vinyl Institute told attendees of a trade conference, quote, recycling cannot go on indefinitely and does not solve the solid waste problem. Despite this knowledge, the Society of the Plastics Industry established the Plastics Recycling Foundation in 1984, bringing together petrochemical companies and bottlers, and launched a campaign focused on the sector's commitment to recycling. In 1988, the trade group rolled out the Chasing Arrows, the widely recognized symbol for recyclable plastic, and they began using it on packaging. Experts have long said that the symbol is highly misleading, and recently federal regulators have echoed their concerns. The Society of the Plastics Industry also established a plastics recycling research center at Rutgers University in New Jersey in 1985, 1 year after state lawmakers passed a mandatory recycling law. Awesome. So you're just going to mandate doing something that the industry knows isn't going to work. And as the guy says down below, it's clearly fraud that they're engaged in. That is fraudulent. So you're selling everybody, people, misinformation that, we're fixing the solid waste problem. We're not burying ourselves in garbage. We're not, putting a layer of microplastic across the bottom of the ocean, and we're not causing ocean life to, choke on this and die. No. We're fixing it. Recycling is going to work. This is just straight up fraud. So anyway, in 1988, industry group, the Council for Solid Waste Solutions, set up a recycling pilot project in St. Paul, Minnesota, where the city council had just voted to ban the plastic polystyrene or styrofoam. And in the early 1990s, another industry group ran ads in Ladies' Home Journal proclaiming a bottle can come back as a bottle over and over again. It might technically be true a couple of times, but, still within 10 years or so, it's done. All the while, behind closed doors, industry leaders maintained that recycling was not a real solution. So as for that chuckle fuck that was like, oh, way to just attack us, you're not even working with us. Bro, you're lying. You're willingly deceiving the public. How is that working with us? But no, we're the fucking problem. In 1994, a representative of Eastman Chemical spoke at an industry conference about the need for proper plastic recycling infrastructure. Quote, while someday this may be a reality, he said, it is more likely that we will wake up and realize that we're not going to recycle our way out of the solid waste issue, unquote. The same year, an Exxon employee told staffers at the American Plastics Council, quote, we are committed to the activities of plastics recycling, but not committed to the results. Quote, it's clearly fraud that they're engaged in, said Wiles. The report does not allege that the companies broke specific laws, but Alyssa Joel, report co-author and attorney, said that she suspects they violated public nuisance, racketeering, and consumer fraud protections. Like, there's got to be some laws they broke in the course of this massive public misinformation campaign. Not to mention setting the costs involved with setting up and the land used and everything in setting up recycling programs. That's just a complete deception on the public that huge amounts of resources are devoted toward. The industry's misconduct continues today, the report alleges. Over the past several years, industry lobbying groups have promoted so-called chemical recycling, which uses chemicals to break down plastic polymers into tiny molecules in order to make new plastics, synthetic fuels, and other products. But the process creates pollution and is even more energy intensive than traditional plastic recycling. The plastic sector has long known that chemical recycling is also not a true solution to plastic waste, the report says. In a 1994 trade meeting, Exxon Chemical Vice President Erwin Lebovitz called one common form of chemical recycling a, quote, fundamentally uneconomical process. And in 2003, a longtime trade consultant criticized the industry for promoting chemical recycling, calling it, quote, another example of how non-science got into the minds of industry and environmental activists alike. Quote, this is just another example, a new version of the deception we saw before, said Allen. Seaholm of the Plastics Industry Association said that the report, quote, was created by an activist, oh no, not an activist, anti-recycling organization and disregards the incredible investments in recycling technologies made by our industry. Unfortunately, they used outdated information and false claims to continue to mislead the public about recycling, he added. He did not expand on which claims were outdated or false, because he was pulling it out of his ass. That's exactly when somebody just responds in that kind of bitter tone without any specifics, you know they're fucking lying. Legal ramifications. The report comes as the plastics industry and recycling are facing growing public scrutiny. 2 years ago, California's Attorney General, Rob Bonta, publicly launched an investigation into fossil fuel and petrochemical producers, quote, for their role in causing and exacerbating the global plastics pollution crisis, unquote. A toxic train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio last February also catalyzed a movement demanding a ban on vinyl chloride, a carcinogen used to make plastic. Last month, the EPA announced a health review of the chemical, the first step toward a potential ban. In 2023, New York State also filed a lawsuit against PepsiCo, saying that its single-use plastics violate public nuisance laws, and that the company misled consumers about the effectiveness of recycling. Yeah, I'm pissed. I thought recycling worked. I didn't know this. The public is also increasingly concerned about the climate impact of plastic production and disposal, which account for 3.4% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. In recent years, 24 cities and states have sued the oil industry for covering up the dangers of the climate crisis, similarly taking the oil and petrochemical industries to court for, quote, knowingly deceiving the public, said Wiles, could force them to change their business models. Quote, I think the first step in solving the problem is holding the companies accountable, he said. Wonder what the other guy would say about that. Judith Enck, a former regional administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency and founder of the advocacy group Beyond Plastics, called the analysis, quote, very solid. Quote, the report should be read by every attorney general in the nation and the Federal Trade Commission, she said. Brian Frosch, the former Attorney General for the state of Maryland, said that the report includes the kind of evidence he would not normally expect to see until a lawsuit has already gone through a process of discovery. Quote, if I were Attorney General, based on what I read in CCI's report, I'd feel comfortable pressing for an investigation and lawsuit, he said.